Time to wake up.
Wake up. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Up you wake, up you wake, up you wake, up you wake. Why?
Time to wake up. Time to wake up.
Wake up. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Up you wake, up you wake, up you wake, up you wake. Why?
Time to wake up.
Good morning, good morning. I would say happy Sabbath, but today's the first day of the week. How's everybody doing out there? Good morning. All glory to the Father, the mighty name of Jesus. This is a rebroadcast of 400 Years Time's Been Up, Part 1. Reason for this rebroadcast, is because when I did the broadcast yesterday, I was blocked on YouTube because of a video that I showed. Had no idea that there was a copyright on those videos, but there was. So I do know at least 2 videos that I showed are not copyrighted. Well, they probably are, but they probably won't get. Now, the other thing is what I'm doing is for educational purposes only. All right. So let me say that disclaimer. It's also in the section. It's also in the section that I'm doing this for educational purposes only. So with that being said, again, thank you guys for tuning in. Welcome to the Wake Up Show. All glory to the Father in the mighty name of Jesus. Shalom, shalom, shalom to everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Please like and share this video. For those that have already seen the video, there will be some videos that I showed that I can't show because of copyright. All right. So let's do this again because this needs to be out, this lesson, especially for those who totally believe the 400 years just went by. All right. And like I said in the other lesson, this whole lesson is to help people who thought the 400 years, like they thought we're supposed to go home. All right. It's the end of the 400 years and we're supposed to be going home. They had that hope. And when it didn't happen, to strengthen the believers not into falling away, because this isn't the first time that this 400-year prophecy, when it comes to us in the United States, this isn't the first time this has happened. me talking to my elders, I've said this before, talking to my elders and especially my teacher, I found out that back in 1979 was the last date of the 400 years was supposed to happen. And when it didn't happen, people started falling away. Same thing, no disrespect to One West, but same thing happened with One West in the year 2000 when they kept saying that America was Babylon, which it's not. That's another lesson that needs to be done. And everything that they read was saying that America was going to come down in the year 2000. And when it didn't come down, all the camps you see today, they split off from each other. And I'm quite sure when that happened, a lot of people fell away and went into Kemet or went into something else, probably turned back into false Sunday doctrine Christianity. And so the reason I've been teaching this for years is because I'm afraid the same thing's going to happen when it comes to the year 2019. So that's why I do this lesson. Now, people are backpedaling. Those that kept saying 2019 and when August 20th didn't happen, then, people started backpedaling, started hearing stuff about, well, it was a spiritual bondage and being mistreated for 400 years spiritually. And I'm like, no, that's not what the Lord told Abraham. That's not what he told Abraham. He told him straight out, they're going to be in captivity. They're going to be, well, we'll read it. I don't want to paraphrase, but we're going to read what it actually says. And so, again, this is not to mock. All right. I don't even call it a false prophecy. I call it a misunderstanding. And you'll see why I call it a misunderstanding, because some people didn't keep reading the whole prophecy that the Lord said to Abram or Abraham. So with that being said, let's get started and open up with the scriptures. I always open up with my lessons. Let's turn to Isaiah 28, and we're going to start reading at verse 9. Whom shall he teach knowledge, and whom shall he make to understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast. Who is the he? He is the Lord. He is God Almighty. How's he teaching? Whom shall he teach to understand the doctrine? That's the whom. So the whom is the actual priest. He said in Exodus 19. His priest was the nation of Israel when he brought them out and told them they would be a holy nation, peculiar people, and a nation of priests, a kingdom of priests. And whom shall he make understand? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little. So he's teaching us also from Genesis to Revelation, but there's so many other messages that's in this book that we can show and teach the world by precepting, line upon line, here a little and there a little. And there's nothing wrong with that. You will have people to say you can't do that. Now, you must get the understanding from the Holy Spirit how to precept, because there are false prophets out here, false precepting. Okay? And that's what happened with this 400 years. All right? But we're going to keep going. Verse 11. For with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak unto this people. So he's telling us flat out, with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak unto this people. He's actually going to speak to his Hebrews, the Israelites, because other verses precept that say that he only gave the answers. What was it in Romans? Paul said the only ones that have the oracles of God are the Israelites. And in Amos, it said that he only showed his secrets. Now, again, I'm paraphrasing his secrets to the prophets. And what were the prophets? They were all Israelites. But when we were scattered across the four corners of the earth, he had to speak to us in other languages, not just Hebrew. Now, I don't knock Hebrew. If you want to learn Hebrew, if you believe it's Hebrew, sometimes I really don't. I'm 50-50 with it. Sometimes I believe it's something that someone else gave us and told us it was Hebrew. But there's people that believe, that Paleo Hebrew, all of that is Hebrew. I don't knock it. I don't knock it. The only problem that I have is when people start knocking English or Spanish. When the Lord said he was going to teach in other languages, when they turn around and say, well, you can't, you ain't going to understand the Lord, what he's saying, unless you know Hebrew. I don't subscribe to that. I don't believe anybody's going in the fire because they never learned Hebrew. This is what the Lord's grace and mercy is about. Are you trying to obey me? That's the whole thing. We get people that like to say, you can't keep all that law. And they're right. You can't keep all the law, especially when we're all in captivity. But that's not an excuse to not try. It's not an excuse. Well, we can't keep it all, so I ain't going to do it anyway. But he told us he's going to talk to us in other languages and teach us in other languages. Let's go to Isaiah 8. Isaiah 8, we're going to start we're only going to read one verse. That's verse 20. To the law, to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. So he's teaching us from Genesis to Malachi and Matthew to Revelation. So that's Genesis to Revelation. And that's how we are supposed to teach everybody else. Not just be New Testament Christian and teach in the New Testament and possibly dabble here and there in the Old. And the same thing. Not just supposed to teach Torah and Tanakh and not in some cases not even touch the New Testament. If anyone is doing either one of those things, what does the book say? There is no light in them. They must teach from Genesis to Revelation. Now let's see who did this. Let's go to the end of the book, Revelations 14, 12, and then we'll get started with this lesson. Revelation 14 and 12. Here is the patience of the saints. Now we know who the saints are. We got songs talking about, when the saints go marching in, I want to be in that number. Well, if you want to go and be in that number marching in, how do you go marching in? Here are they that keep the commandments of God, the law, and the faith of Jesus, the testimony. So if anyone ever tells you, you don't have to keep that law, Christ did it all, we're alive in Christ, we don't have to keep the commandments of God, they're lying to you. And the same thing, if someone says, well, you got to keep the law, but you ain't got to deal with that Jesus character, they're lying to you too. It's called balance. Commandments of God and the faith of Jesus is what will get you into the kingdom. Plain and simple. Let's go to Acts 7. So, we're going to go to Acts 7. And we're going to deal with this 400 years misunderstanding that has hopefully hasn't made anybody fall away from the truth. All right. Because my fear back in the day when I first learned out about all this stuff was, man, when 2019 comes, there's gonna be so many people that if when it doesn't happen, they're gonna be like, man, them Hebrews was lying. I told y'all they was lying. And that's what the urban and Christian apologists are doing now. They're having a field frenzy over the fact that it's 2020 and they're lumping all Hebrews into this. All right. Now I have watched some of them and they said, well, I never really saw One West or some of the camps teach this. And they were right because, I believe One West camps learned their lesson after the year 2000. But what I've also noticed when it came to this 400 years is that I never really saw any elderly teachers. I watch elder teachers too. I've not seen any of them teach this 400-year prophecy was supposed to be here in America in 2019. And like I said, I know why, because when I spoke to my elder, he told us they all thought back in the 60s when the Muslims came up with this, which was really the Hebrews at first, but when the Muslims was promoting it, that in 1979, when it didn't happen, they all learned their lesson from that. So this 400 years we're dealing with now is mainly young folks. All right. And again, people are backpedaling. What they're saying now is, had one dude on my live chat yesterday in here talking about, excuse me, talking about the end of the 400th year, the 400th year is actually in 2020, August 20th. And I'm like, no, if you start in 1619, you're going to end in 2019. But he's saying, but it's got to be the end of the year. So now we backpedaling and saying that it's at August 20th, 2020. You got other people who started realizing this thing may not happen in, and they started another date in 2024. And I'm like, man, come on. The problem is everyone is using numbers. Everyone's trying to use numbers and they're giving a false hope. You read the book, you will see, and I'll deal with that in part 2. No one knows when we're going home. When Christ comes to gather everybody, that's when you're going home. And that's when he comes. But everyone keeps trying to figure out dates. And that's the problem Israel keeps having. Doing the same thing that the Gentiles doing. How many of y'all remember last in 2017 that there were Gentiles predicting the end of the world on September 23rd? Nothing happened. And what does the book say about prophets, false prophets who prophesy and nothing comes to pass? They're supposed to be killed, but we can't do that these days. So this whole thing with this 400 years, this whole thing with this 400 years is something that we did not come up with. I don't know why I keep skipping over that. So we're going to deal with Stephen's testimony, because this one character that has a huge congregation, his initials is OT. When he was promoting this 400-year thing a couple years ago, he started off with Acts 7 like it was prophecy. Let's understand, Stephen's testimony is not prophecy. It's a testimony. What is a testimony? It's testifying to something that already happened. When you get up in front of your church and you testify about something that already happened, that's in the past. It's not the future. When you prophesy about something that's going to come, that's prophesying. But testimonials is about things that happened in the past. And that's what was going on here in Acts 7. Stephen was being persecuted. He broke down Israel so so fine that the people got upset and killed him because he told the truth on them. He told the truth about his people, and his people got mad and stoned him to death. But let's read what he was saying about the 400 or 430 years. So let's start at Acts chapter 7, verse 2. Now, this is Stephen here. And he said, Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The glory of the Father appeared unto our father Abraham. I'm sorry. And the God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham. And when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Sharon, and said unto him, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Sharon. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him unto this land wherein ye now dwell. And he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as to set his foot on. Yet he promised that he would give it to him for a possession and to his seed after him, when as yet he had no child. And God spake on this wise, that this seed should sojourn in a land that they should and that they should bring them into bondage and entreat them evil 400 years. So this is the testimony we're reading. And what Stephen said is that his seed should sojourn in a strange land and that they should bring them into bondage and entreat them evil 400 years. Verse 7. And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge. So we're talking about a nation who's treating another nation wrong. And then the Lord will bring that nation and I'm sorry, that he will bring that nation out and he will judge the other nation. That's what the book is saying. Verse 8. I'm sorry, verse 9. And the nation whom they shall bring into bondage I will judge, said God. And after that shall they come forth and serve me in this place. Now, they're going to come forth and serve him in this place. He's testifying about what God said to Abraham. Let's read verse 8. And he gave him the covenant of the circumcision. So Abraham begot Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot the 12 patriarchs. Let's skip down to verse 17. But when the time of the promise drew near, God has sworn unto Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. So when God promised Abraham, when everyone was going to come out, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt, till another king arose, which knew not Joseph. The same dealt subtly with our kindred. The same. So they're in Egypt. They multiplied in Egypt. And the same dealt subtly with our kindred. And evil entreated our fathers, so that cast out their young children to the end that they may not live. This is when they cast the children into the Nile River and the crocodiles was eating them. This is the harsh punishment that was coming down. Well, not punishment. I'm sorry. This was the harsh treatment that was coming down on the children of Israel in Egypt. All right. Let's skip down to verse 33. Then said the Lord unto him, put off thy shoes from thy feet, for the place where thou standest is holy ground. I have seen the affliction of my people which is in Egypt, and I have heard their groaning, and I have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send thee into Egypt. And Moses said, then Moses, whom they refused, saying, who made thee a ruler and a judge? The same did God send. And stuff want to mess with me early in the morning. Then God sent a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel, which appeared to him in the bush. He brought them out. After that, he showed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt and in the Red Sea and in the wilderness 40 years. So this is the step. This is Stephen's testimony we'll read. All right. Matter of fact, let's keep reading. I like reading this part too. Verse 37. This is that Moses which said unto the children of Israel, a prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren, like unto me. Him shall he hear. This is he that was in the church. This is he that was in the church. Again, this is he that was in the church in the wilderness. The church started in the wilderness. Christ may have came and changed the Levitical priesthood to 12 new apostles in Acts 2, but it's still the same church. He just fired some people and hired new people because Stephen's testimony says this is he that was in the church in the wilderness with the angel which spake to him in the Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the lively oracles to give unto us. So all of this happened in Egypt except in the wilderness with Moses. But I just wanted to read that anyway. So this is Stephen's testimony. It's not prophecy saying, see, this is what's going to happen in the future with the 400 years. Like people have lied and said that it has. And that has nothing to do with it. This is a testimony. This is why you got to watch who you dealing with. And you got to study for yourself too. Because you could have somebody, you could believe, oh, this is a man of God, include me. Study for yourself because I could be wrong. Don't want to be, but you got to study for yourself too. So with that being said, let's look at something that let me see. Yeah, let's look at something that definitely is. There's two sides. There's two arguments. Okay, just want to let everybody know there's an argument now when it comes to how long did the children of Israel stay in Egypt. Now, let me say this before I get this started. I'm not here to say, now I'm going to tell you my side. I totally believe that the book is saying 400 years of ill treatment was in Egypt. All right. This is my side. I believe that they spent 430 years in Egypt, but 400 of those years was the slavery captivity. Now, the other side of the argument, people are saying that it was only 215 years. All right. So I'm going to show this video. But either way it goes, the 400 years was back then, not now. That's the whole purpose of my lesson, is to show whether you believe it was 430 years or 400 years, if you believe they were in Egypt for 215 years or 400 years, the whole 430 with the 400 in there somewhere was back then. It was not now. So with that being said, let's watch this video. Right soon as I get it to start playing.
How long were the Israelites in Egypt? In Exodus 12:40, it says, "Now the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. And so because of this, movies like the Ten Commandments will say things like this.
That's a hard dance you do, old man. We've been dancing it for 400 years.
400 years we have waited.
400 years in bondage, and today, move!
After 400 years of slavery.
And experts on the topic will say things like this.
The Israelites were there 430 years. We have the record in the Bible that tells about the Israelites going to Egypt and living there for 430 years.
But if you do the math, you'll find that this is not mathematically possible. You see, Moses was 80 years old when they left Egypt. His father Amram lived to 137. His father Kohath lived to 133. And Kohath was one of the 66 persons who went with Jacob down into Egypt. Now let's just stretch this out as much as we possibly can. Let's assume that Kohath was a newborn baby when he arrived in Egypt. Let's assume that Amram was born the year that his father died, and let's assume that Moses was born the year that his father died. So take 133 plus 137 plus 80, and that equals 350, which means that the amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt could have been no longer than 350 years maximum. Now, more than likely, Kohath was probably not a newborn baby when he arrived in Egypt. More than likely, Moses was not born the year that his father died, and more than likely, Amram was not born the year that his father died, which means that the amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt would have been significantly less than 350 years. So why does Exodus 12:40 say the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years when this is not mathematically possible? The key is found in one of Paul's letters. In Galatians 3:16 and 17, Paul says, "Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. And this I say, that the law, which was 430 years later, cannot annul the covenant that was confirmed before by God in Christ." Basically, Paul is saying that from the time that Abraham received the promise to the time that Moses received the law, there was 430 years. Well, Abraham received the promise when he entered Canaan when he was 75 years old. Then, 25 years later, when Abraham was 100 years old, that's when Isaac was born. Then, 60 years later, when Isaac was 60 years old, that's when Jacob was born. Then, 130 years later, when Jacob was 130 years old, that's when all of Israel arrived in Egypt. So take 25 plus 60 plus 130, and that equals 215, which means that there was 215 years from the time that Abraham entered Canaan to the time that all of Israel arrived in Egypt. Now, Moses received the law the same time that they left Egypt, because remember, the Israelites were living in Goshen, and then Moses led them out of Goshen, brought them through the wilderness, and brought them to the sea. And then God split the waters of the sea in half and brought them into Midian, which is in Arabia, then brought them to Mount Sinai, which is where Moses received the law. And so Moses received the law the same time they left Egypt. So Paul is saying that there was 430 years from this point to this point, and according to the Old Testament, there's 215 years from this point to this point. So take 430 years and then subtract 215 years, and that equals 215, which means that the amount of time that the Israelites were in Egypt was 215 years. 215 in Egypt, 215 in Canaan, 430 total. Now that is mathematically possible, because 215 is significantly less than 350. And that's exactly what the Greek Septuagint says in Exodus 12:40. It says, "And the sojourning of the children of Israel while they sojourn in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan was 430 years. The Samaritan Pentateuch says the same thing. It says, "Now the sojourning of the children of Israel and of their fathers, which they had dwelt in the land of Canaan and in Egypt, was 430 years. Flavius Josephus says they left Egypt 430 years after our forefather Abraham came into Canaan, but 215 years only after Jacob removed into Egypt. Flavius Josephus is saying the exact same thing. He's saying they left Egypt 430 years since our forefather Abraham came into Canaan, but 215 years only since Jacob removed into Egypt. Flavius Josephus is saying the exact same thing. So why do modern translations say that the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years when this is not mathematically possible? The reason why is because modern translations like the New King James, the NIV, the NASB, These are all translated from the Hebrew Masoretic text. But
Now I want you guys to watch something. I showed this yesterday too. This Gentile is saying that the Hebrew Masoretic text, that the New King James, the NIV, and the NASB were all translated from the Hebrew Masoretic text, which he's saying is incorrect. Now watch later on the other books he decides to add on when, in my opinion, should have been right here from the beginning.
the Hebrew Masoretic text is not the original Hebrew text. The copy of the Masoretic text that most modern translations are translated from is called the Leningrad Codex, which was copied in the 11th century AD. But the Greek Septuagint was translated more than 1,000 years before that in 250 BC, which means that the Greek Septuagint would not have been translated from the Hebrew Masoretic, but rather it would have been translated from a much older copy of the Hebrew that's no longer around today. The Samaritan Pentateuch also predates the Masoretic text and would also have been translated from a much older copy of the Hebrew. Flavius Josephus was a 1st century Jewish historian. He lived long before the Masoretic text was copied, and Josephus had access to ancient Hebrew texts that have since been lost or destroyed. Paul the Apostle lived long before the Masoretic text was copied, and Paul knew Hebrew. In Acts 26, when Paul talks about his encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, he says that Jesus spoke to him in the Hebrew language, and Paul understood him. Paul knew Hebrew, and so Paul would also have studied from a much older copy of the Hebrew. And what Paul says in Galatians 3:16 and 17 is consistent with the Greek Septuagint, the Samaritan Pentateuch, and the writings of Flavius Josephus. Now the Bible says, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word shall be established. Well, we've got more than 2 or 3 witnesses here. We've got 4 witnesses, all bearing witness that the original Hebrew text said that the Israelites will be in Egypt and Canaan for 430 years. But more than 1,000 years later, when the Hebrew Masoretic text was copied, the phrase "and Canaan" was dropped out of the text, and all of our Bibles are translated from this corrupted copy of the Hebrew. The New King James, the Old King James, the NIV, the NASB, the ESV.
Now, did you see that? Let me roll it back a little bit.
Corrupted copy of the Hebrew. The New King James, the Old King James.
Now you see how he added the King James version that we have now. Here's my question. Why wasn't that said in the beginning? It's being said now. People, this is when you have to really, when you look at people's things, what they put out here, you have to really watch. All right. Because we know the King James is the most popular book on the planet. Now, why would God, remember who runs everything? Why would God let a corrupt version like that be the most popular on the planet when he's trying to save everyone? So it's like they're really in a kind of, this is why I believe Satan puts stuff together. So this is why I say you have to watch everything that goes on, because little thing like this could make people lose faith. Something as small as this that can pass people by, some people will look at it and be like, well, man, if that's corrupted, I don't need to be messing with none of this stuff. And from the history he just gave, that means almost all these books are corrupted. So what's the use even trying to serve the Lord? That, in my opinion, is Satan's game. All right. So I'm gonna let it keep rolling. Just watch what you looking at on Facebook and believing in. I mean, not Facebook, but YouTube, anywhere. Study for yourself.
The NIV, the NASB, the ESV. If you go to BibleGateway.com, you'll find there's 50 English translations of the Bible on this website. And every single one of them say that the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years, which is incorrect and mathematically impossible. Every single one of these translations are inconsistent with the original Hebrew because they're all translated from the Hebrew Masoretic. And according to these 4 witnesses, the Masoretic text copied it incorrectly. As a matter of fact, these ages of Moses and his father and grandfather are recorded in the Masoretic text, and yet they only add up to 350 years maximum. So in that sense, there's even a fifth witness. The Masoretic bears witness against itself. And so the amount of time the Israelites were in Egypt was only 215 years. But the years of slavery was even less than that, because the Israelites did not become slaves until after Joseph and all that generation died, and then a new king arose who did not know Joseph. Well, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered Pharaoh's service. Then shortly after, there were 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine. So it would appear that after the 7 years of abundance, Joseph would have been 37 years old. Then 2 years into the famine, when he was 39, that's when all of Israel arrived in Egypt. So based on the information given, it appears as if Joseph was 39 years old at the beginning of that 215 years. Then Joseph died at 110. So take 110 and subtract 39, and that equals 71, which means that for 71 years, the Israelites were in Egypt under Joseph's rule, and they were not slaves during those 71 years. So take the 215 years that the Israelites were in Egypt, subtract the 71 years that Joseph was in power, and that equals 144, which means that the Israelites were not slaves for any longer than 144 years maximum. Now Moses was 80 years old when they left Egypt, and they were already in slavery when Moses was born, which means that they could not have been slaves for any less than 80 years minimum. So take the 215 years that the Israelites were in Egypt, subtract the 71 years that Joseph was in power, subtract the 80 years of Moses' life, and that equals 64, which means that there were 64 years in between Joseph's death and Moses' birth. The Israelites became slaves sometime after Joseph died and sometime before Moses was born, sometime within that 64-year time period. Now let's just assume that the Israelites became slaves at exactly the midpoint in between Joseph's death and Moses' birth. That would be 32 years after Joseph died and 32 years before Moses was born. If this is the case, then that would mean that the Israelites were slaves for 112 years. And so the amount of time the Israelites were in slavery was probably about 112 years or so. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but definitely no more than a maximum of 144 and definitely no less than 80 years minimum. Whatever the case, the Israelites were definitely not slaves for nearly as long as the movies make it sound when they say,
400 years in bondage, and today he won't move.
Israelites were not slaves for 400 years. They were only slaves for about 112 years or so, plus or minus 32 years. But doesn't Genesis 15:13 say that they'll be enslaved 400 years? No, it doesn't. It says they'll be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. You see, Genesis 15 does not say the Israelites will be enslaved in Egypt 400 years. It says Abraham's seed will be enslaved and mistreated in a land not their own 400 years. Canaan was a land not their own. Egypt was a land not their own. Isaac was Abraham's seed. Jacob was Abraham's seed. The multitudes in Egypt were Abraham's seed. Isaac was mistreated in Canaan. Genesis says that Ishmael, the son of Hagar, was scoffing at Isaac. Paul says in Galatians that the son who was born according to the flesh, who was Ishmael, persecuted the son who was born according to the spirit, who was Isaac. Paul says that Ishmael persecuted Isaac. So Isaac, Abraham's seed, was persecuted or mistreated in Canaan, a land not his own. Abraham's seed was mistreated in a land not his own. From the time that Abraham received the promise to the time that Moses received the law, there was 430 years according to Galatians 3:17. 25 years after Abraham received the promise, that's when Isaac was born. That takes it down to 405 years. Now Genesis says that Ishmael scoffed at Isaac on the same day that Isaac was weaned. Well, according to the Jewish Agency for Israel, in Talmudic times, it was the custom to celebrate the child's weaning anytime from 18 months to 5 years. It goes on to say that according to Rabbi Joshua, a child should be allowed to nurse up to the age of 5. Well, if Isaac was weaned at 5 years of age, and Ishmael began to persecute Isaac on the same day that Isaac was weaned, then that would take it down to exactly 400 years. Abraham's seed was mistreated in Canaan. Abraham's seed was mistreated in Egypt. Abraham's seed was enslaved in Egypt. Abraham's seed was enslaved and mistreated in a land not their own 400 years. You see, when you take the prophecy in Genesis and you match that up with the timeline in Exodus, then you're able to understand how these puzzle pieces fit together. But the main thing that causes people to misinterpret this prophecy in Genesis is the Hebrew Masoretic text has dropped the phrase "and Canaan" out of the text. This is the main thing that causes people to believe that the Israelites were in Egypt for 430 years.
Now, let me say this. He just showed the 400 years back then. Again, I'm not here to argue how long the Israelites were in Egypt. I believe they were enslaved for 400 years. All right. That's just me. He believes that there was less than 215, maybe 100 and something years. But he also just showed 400 years of ill treatment. I'm not too sure about the whole thing when it comes to Isaac and Ishmael, but again, he's showing that the 400-year prophecy was then, not now. I'm going to have to keep saying this through the lesson, that it's not about now. Even with his findings, he showed 400 years was then.
But the truth is, they were in Egypt for only half that time, for 215 years. According to the documentary Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus, the Israelites' arrival in Egypt was around 1665 BC, and the Exodus took place at about 1450 BC. This means that the Israelites were in Egypt for 215 years. This is the only thing that the archaeological evidence supports. The evidence does not support 430 years in Egypt. This is the reason why it's important to understand biblical history correctly first, in order to correctly understand how it correlates with Egyptian history and archaeology.
So let's get back to this lesson. He showed in his version that the 400 years was in Canaan and Egypt. Let's put it that way. Again, I still believe it was, according to the book that I have, I'm still believing that it was in Egypt. But he has a good point. Can't argue it. Y'all know I'm about balance. So he has 430 years from the time of the promise to the time they came out. All right. And then he has 400 years from the time that Isaac was being mistreated to the time they came out. But that's then. Okay. That's the point that I'm trying to make. It was then. It's not now. So with some other brothers and some sisters have said too, is that they believe that the 400 years is now, and now that the 400 years is over with, now we're coming to the judgments. So they believe that, I guess they believe that we got here in 1619, which in part 2 next week, or this Sabbath coming up, I'm going to show how long we've been in slavery here in America. All right. They believe that 1619 was the start and 2019 was the end. And now we're going to be in the judgments. Now we're going to read in this book that the day that they came out of Egypt was the end of the 400. That was the end of it. You just saw brother, the dude saying his documentary. The time when they came out, that was 430 years. So on the very day that the 400 or the 430 years was over is when they came out. But what happened while they were in the 400 years? The judgments came upon Egypt. And then when the judgment was, they came out. And then there was one more, and that was it, when they drowned in the sea. That was it. But because the 400 has gone past with us, everyone's going to say now, you got judgments coming. We got to see all these judgments. Some people are not understanding the end times. And I'm hopefully with these 2 lessons, I can get people to understand these end times. But they're saying that we're dealing with the judgment. So let's go ahead and read, first of all, the entire 400-year prophecy spoken by God. And it's from Genesis 15:12 through 16, not Genesis 15:13 and 14. Because what Israel has done is cherry picked. And I'm quite sure some Hebrews don't want to hear that, because that's what we say all the time when it comes to the Sunday doctrine Christians. Y'all cherry picking. Well, Hebrews be cherry picking too. We're going to read the entire one, not Genesis 13 and 14 alone. We're going to read the entire prophecy from Genesis 15:12 through 16 to get an understanding. All right. So let's start at Genesis 15 and 12. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, who is he? Again, this is the Lord speaking from this point to the end of verse 16. Know of surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Now, from what he just showed, he's saying that Isaac was afflicted. But who did Isaac serve? That's the question. Who did Isaac serve? Who did Jacob serve? And no, you can't run and say, well, he served Laban. He was paying off a debt because he wanted his wife. Know of surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Let's keep reading. And also that nation. So if it's about that nation, which we know were the Egyptians, how did it come to Ishmael when Ishmael is the father of the Arabs? Let's read again. And also that nation whom they shall serve. That's the slavery. Will I judge? And afterward shall they come out with great substance. When did the Lord start judging? Excuse me. When did the Lord start judging Egypt? While Israel was in captivity in Egypt. And he told the angels, he told Moses, put the blood on the doorpost. And when I come into the land of Egypt, which he used the death angel, the destroyer, when he sees the blood on your doorpost, he will pass over you. So the children of Israel were still in Egypt when the judgments came down. The judgments came down. Those that did what the Lord said, same thing's going to happen. Those that did exactly what the Lord said to do were protected by those angels. The Lord passed over them while he destroyed everything in Egypt. When he destroyed the firstborn, I'm sorry. Same thing's going to happen in the future if you read and understand this book. And if you're obeying the commandments of God, because this was a commandment. He said, you do this, you'll be straight. After that happened, the judgments, then we read, afterward shall they come out with great substance. So after the judgments, the day they came out with great substance on the end of the 400 years or the 430 years. So this is why, my precious, beloved Israelite brothers and sisters, this is why the Christian and urban apologists are mocking you, because they know this. They've read this. They know that the day that Israel came out of Egypt was the end of the 400 years or end of the 430 years. So if you're claiming this was supposed to be now, the day that August 20th, 2019 came was the day you were supposed to get up out of here. And it didn't happen. And that's why they waited, just like I waited, until 2020 to start saying something. This is why you got to understand where this whole thing came from. And I'm gonna explain that later, but let's get back into this. All right. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. This is still the Lord speaking. He's telling them, after all this stuff that I'm telling you is going to happen, that you see in darkness, and thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, and thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But the Lord ain't done talking. He got one more thing to say. But in the fourth generation, they shall come hither again. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not full. Who are the they? This is the children of Israel, who he was telling, your seed is going to be afflicted 400 years, and I'm going to judge, and afterward they're going to come out with great substance. But in the fourth generation, they're going to come back here. Where was Abraham when he was getting his dream? In the land of Canaan. He wasn't in Egypt, for those that think, oh, come back to Egypt. No, he was telling him this in the land of Canaan before it was called the land of Israel. So then when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, they wandered wilderness, came back here. And he said, they're coming back, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So the Lord got a problem with the Amorites. And as you read the book and understand, anytime the Lord gets fed up with a whole nation of people, he wipes them all out with another nation of people. And this is not what's being taught. This verse right here is the key to when the 400 years took place. This is the affliction that was going on. You know what? Let's recap that. Let's go back and read it straight through. The entire 400-year prophecy spoken by God. Genesis 12 through 16. So we get a clear understanding when you read it straight through. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, an horror of a great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abraham, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall have and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. I hope you guys get a clear understanding of the full prophecy and stop cherry picking 13 and 14 and saying it's about America. Here's the affliction that was going on. You see an Egyptian. Now, these are hieroglyphics. And this is also for people who don't believe that we are the children of God, that we are the Israelites here in America and abroad. If the children of Israel were white looking, why isn't that on the hieroglyphics in the tombs of Egypt? Here we go with more affliction and more artifacts. Just giving you a little history rundown on something. Let's keep going. Let's go to Exodus 12. Let's go to Exodus 12. We got to run down history too when we deal with this. Because for those that are new, you're going to run into people that's going to try to test you and see if you can fall off your faith and say you're not Israel and all types of stuff. Then they're going to also help paint all of Israel as being evil and negative. And we already seeing that now in the news. So, but you know, that was kind of spearheaded by apologists, in my opinion. So let's go to Exodus 12. Exodus 12, we're going to start reading at verse 29. Verse 29, Exodus 12. Now here's the judgments before they came out of Egypt. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on the throne unto his firstborn in the captive that was in the dungeon, for all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, but there was none, not a house where there was not one dead, except the children of Israel, who obeyed the commandment of putting the blood on the doorposts. Now, if there was any Israelites who did not do what God said, their firstborn died. And that's the same thing that's going to happen in the future. Just because you're born Israel by blood does not mean you're getting into the kingdom. Just got to say that to my Israel brothers and sisters. You have to be obedient and do what God said to do. And Jesus told us, keep the commandments. And he didn't cherry pick which ones. He wasn't about to run down 613 laws. Let's keep reading. And Pharaoh, okay, I read that, 31. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye said. Take your flocks and your herds as ye have said, and be gone and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent on the people. Why? Because all of them judgments that happened before the last day of the 430 or 400 years, they was going through it, the plagues, all of that. And they were like, get these cats out of here. Because if their God done killed all our firstborn, he might kill all of us next. Let's keep going. That they may send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we be all dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound upon their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. So again, the judgments happened, and afterward, they're coming out with great substance. Ooh, excuse me. Verse 36, and the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required. And they spoiled the Egyptians. And the children of Israel sojourned in Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men besides children. So you had 6,000 men alone, just the men. Besides children. So if you just got the men, and he just said besides children, where are the women? There was women. They had wives, or they wouldn't have became 600,000 men. So let's just assume, because this was permitted then, that as a minimum, these 600,000 men, as a minimum, had 2 wives apiece. So if you got 600,000 men, let's say 1.2 million women, and then all the children, that's a lot of people. That's a couple of million that came up out of that. Just keep reading. Forgot where I left off at. Oh, the 600,000. And then verse 38. And we must read this too. We must read when they came out, who came with them. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, and even much cattle. So the mixed multitude were not Israelites. They were the other nations, because let's remember, Egypt was the center of the world. The same way so-called America is the center, especially New York, trade, all that stuff took place in Egypt. Egypt became great because they used the slaves, the Hebrews, just like all the other nations did. Most of these nations became great because why? They got to use the Hebrews for free labor. And ain't nobody gonna really want to let you go. Just like Egypt, they didn't want to let them go till God brought the hammer down. It's plain and simple. And the same thing is going to happen in the future. But the 400 years was then. So a mixed multitude came out. That means other nations that were there doing trades or whatever, they said, man, look what they got doing in it. We gonna follow your God. 10 men gonna take one man's skirt and say, we going with you because we know God is with you. Paraphrasing. Same thing's gonna happen in the future, people. But it will not be the end of the 400 years. Because I'm going to show we've been in captivity here in America longer than that in part 2. Let's keep reading. Where was I at? Now the mixed multitude. Okay, verse 39. And they baked unleavened cakes of dough, which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they prepared themselves any victual. This is why. Now, this is exactly why the Lord made us have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. All right, for 7 days. But when they came out on the day of the first, for those that do observe the feast days, they came out on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's the day that marked the end of the 400 or the end of the 430 years back then. And the Lord made it where we're supposed to observe this in all our dwellings, not just in Israel. Let's keep reading. Now, the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. So here's my question when it came to that Septuagint thing. Why? I forgot where they said it was at, but why is it saying Egypt here and also saying Egypt in the New Testament? So this is what the question, and people can hit me in my inbox or put it in this chat or put it in the comment. If you're only showing one part where the Septuagint is saying 430 years in Egypt and the land of Canaan, why isn't this saying this all over the book? Because the one thing I have learned, is the Lord will say something here and say it again someplace else because of people trying to take words out of the book. When I used to teach children's class, I had to show them that the original Israelites were black. I've done it on here too for you guys. We know that Joseph was black, right? Or he wouldn't have looked like the Egyptians and passed off, and his brothers would have recognized him if he looked like he was white. So that would also tell you if Joseph was black and all his brothers were black, that means Jacob had to be black. Now, what if someone took that out? What if that was in the books before, but somebody took it out? This is why the Lord says precept on precept, and he teaches his priests only, because they're going to recognize, wait a minute, if these cats was black, that means Jacob had to be black too. That's just a little thing I like to show. So again, if they're saying that in the Septuagint, which they're saying is predating this, why isn't like that all through the book? That's the question I have. That's verse 41. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the self same day, it came to pass that all of the host of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So this is now confirming that the end of the 430 years that Stephen was testifying to, the very day they came out, was the end of the 430 years. Even the self same day to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord for bringing them out into the land. Out from the land. That is the night of the Lord to be observed, all the children of Israel in their generations. That's what we're supposed to do. All right. So we just read again, and it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the self same day, it came to pass that all of the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt that same day. And then we're supposed to keep this in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is that night of the Lord to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. And that's why we observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We're still supposed to do this. But of course, people want to say you don't have to do that no more. Let's go to Psalms. You see what's next. Yeah. Let's go to Psalms 105. And we're going to read this again. We read what happened, but we're going to read a testimony within the law. Psalms 105. Let's get Psalms 105. All right. Psalms 105. And we're going to start reading at verse 23. And this is speaking about the Lord and the things that he did. All right. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. And he increased his people greatly and made them stronger than their enemies. This is why the Egyptians started saying, man, we got to do something, because these cats, what if they turn on us? What if we go to war and they turn on us? That's food for thought for these days too, people. Ain't nothing different. Ain't nothing new under the sun. We got too many of these cats. What if they turn on us? He turned their heart. Verse 25. He turned their heart to hate his people, to deal subtly with his servants. Didn't we read that earlier? So now we know that the Lord is the one who turned the Egyptians against us. Remember, our forefathers didn't sin. They ain't do nothing wrong. They were just born. They were living in Egypt. Everything was cool till, Joseph died, and later on things was probably still cool. And all of a sudden they looking at all these Egyptians, and all of a sudden the Lord, he turned their heart to hate his people and to deal subtly with his servants. He sent Moses, his servant, and Aaron, whom he had chosen. They showed his signs among them and wonders in the land of Ham. Skip down to verse 36. He smote all of the firstborn in their land, the chief of all their strength. So there were the judgments before he brought them out. Verse 37, he brought them forth also with silver and gold. There's the great substance. And there was not one feeble person among the tribes. That means there was not one weak person among those tribes. So when you watch the movie, The 10 Commandments, you see them all coming out. You see the old man with the crutch, and you see the old woman riding in the cart. That didn't happen then. Every single one of them was strong. Egypt was glad when they departed, for the fear of them fell upon them. Verse 42, for he remembered his holy promise. He remembered his holy promise. And Abraham, his servant, he remembered what he told Abraham. They're going to go in the land, be treated, and I'm going to bring them out. And he brought forth his people with joy, and his chosen with gladness, and gave them the lands of the heathen, and they inherited the labor of the people, that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws. Praise ye the Lord. So wait a minute. Let's go back to verse 44. And gave them the lands of the heathen. Well, who were the heathen? The Canaanites, because that whole land was ran by the Canaanites. And who were the Canaanites? Children of Ham. So yes, that part of Africa, what people want to call the continent of Africa, but it was the land of Ham. And that section was the land of the Canaanites. And within the Canaanites were the Amorites. And they inherited the labor of the people. So these people they had tilled the land, they had everything together. And when Israel went back to take the land, they inherited everything that was there. That land was that great. Let's go back to Genesis 15 now. Because now we're going to deal with the Amorites. We're going to deal with the part of the promise that people don't really talk about. Let's go back to Genesis 15. And let's deal with these Amorites. Genesis 15, we're going to deal with the end of the prophecy now. And we're going to deal with this. I've seen other people. I saw a brother the other day, a couple of weeks ago, talk about the 400 years. And the thing is, he read the whole prophecy, but he never dealt with this part. And that's what, my beloved brothers and sisters, you have to remember the whole prophecy. And when he gets to this part, we're going to show that this actually happened, which will let you know that the 400 years was back then, not now. Let's read. But in the fourth generation, they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Skip down to verse 18. In the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. So everything you see right here is Abraham's inheritance. not Israel's inheritance, Abraham's. So you got the Nile River right here, and then you have the Euphrates River right here. And all this land is the inheritance of Abraham. Let's keep reading. The Kenites, the Kenizzites, and the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaims, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So all the land that he's showing them, he's telling them, these people live here, and they all really lived in this area. Because as you can see here, this is all a part of the land of Ham, we're going to deal with later. But the Canaanites, all the Egyptians were here, but the Canaanites just had this little part right here, where you see Israel at now. So who are the Amorites? Let's go to Genesis 10. Because if the promise was to come back in the fourth generation, back to where I'm telling you this land, the land you're in, Abraham, I'm telling you right here, 4 generations after I bring them out of Egypt, they coming back here and they're going to take care of these Amorites. But people don't know who the Amorites are. This is why you have to follow genealogy. Stop letting people tell you, what's that part? I can't remember it right now, but off the top of my head, paraphrasing, when Paul's talking about endless genealogies. If you don't study the law and figure out who is who, especially here in Genesis 10, a lot of things that you read in the future are not going to make sense, or people's going to make up false doctrines. So let's read who the Amorites are. Genesis 10, we're going to start at verse 1. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. Now, if you read verses 2 through 5, that's talking about the sons of Japheth, which are the Gentiles, white folks and Asians. If you go down to verse 21 and read that to the end, those are the sons of Shem. But we're going to deal with the sons of Ham. Skip down to verse 6. And the sons of Ham, Cush, that's the Ethiopians, and Mizraim, those were the Egyptians, and Phut, those are the Libyans, and Canaan. So those are the Canaanites that live in this part of the land. Skip down to verse 15. And Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite. So the Amorites, again, are Canaanites who lived in this part of the land. But the Lord had a problem with these cats. Skip down to verse 20 just to close this part out. These are the sons of Ham after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. So the Lord said, you're coming back to this part of the land to kill off the Amorites. Because why? The Amorites, the iniquity, the sin of the Amorites are not yet full. Once the sin is full, he's going to kill them all off. Same thing's going to happen in the future. Right now, we're living in the time of the Gentiles. Their sins are not yet full. When their sins are full, that's when the Lord's coming back and he's destroying this system. Now, anybody within these Gentile nations or African Hamite nations or even some other Semite nations, if they turn to the Lord and go in the way that Israel is going, even Israelites got to turn too. and keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus, they won't be destroyed. That's my warning out to all of the rest of the heathens. And I'm not saying heathen in a bad way. That's my warning. If you're a Gentile and you still doing what the Gentiles do, you will be destroyed. But if you start turning and doing what Israel is doing, when he comes to save Israel, he will save you as well. We've just read that he did it before in the land of Egypt. If he did it before, he's going to do it again. Same God right now, same God back then. Let's go to Numbers 21. But we know from reading this book, the Lord wanted Israel to kill off all the Canaanites. He didn't have no mercy for them. He wasn't having no mercy. He was like, nah, these cats is bad. And I want y'all in this land, but I don't want y'all being influenced by these cats. So I need y'all to kill them all off. Now, some we did kill off, but we didn't kill off all the Canaanites. But what we're about to read, we killed off all of the Amorites who were Canaanites. Numbers 21, verse 10. Numbers 21, verse 10. And the children of Israel set forward and pitched in Oboth. Let me see what the next one is. Right, I'm sorry. So who are the Amorites and where did they live? So we already read who the Amorites are. And we're reading where did they live. So let's read. Let me see who's the next one. Yep. So Numbers 21. And let's start reading at verse 10. The children of Israel set forward and pitched in Oboth. And they journeyed from Oboth and pitched in Ibeream in the wilderness, which is before Moab, toward the sun rising. From thence they removed and pitched in the valley of Zarad. From thence they removed and pitched in the other side of Arnon, which is in the wilderness that cometh out of the coast of the Amorites. For Arnon is the border of Moab between Moab and the Amorites. Let's skip down to verse 21. And Israel sent messengers unto Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, let me pass through the land. We will not turn into the fields. That means we ain't going to eat your food. Or into the vineyards. We're not going to go get your grapes and make wines and all of that stuff. We will not drink the waters of the well. We won't even go get water. We just going to march straight through and that's it. But we will go along by the king's highway until we be passed by thy borders. But what did the king of the Amorites do? And King Sihon would not suffer Israel to pass through his border. But Sihon gathered all his people together and went out against Israel into the wilderness, and he came to Jahaz and fought against Israel. Isn't that a shame? You got a people that's saying, look, man, we just need to get to the other side. Can we just pass through? Look, we ain't even gonna go to your fields, eat nothing. I'm gonna make sure my people keep their word. We ain't gonna go eat none of your food. We ain't gonna go in none of your vineyards. And matter of fact, when we see a well, even if we're thirsty, we ain't even gonna get your well water. This is how urgent we trying to get through here. But the Amorites was full of iniquity. Isn't that what the Lord said in the promise? The iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So they weren't trying to hear it. So they went out against them. And then what happened? 24. And Israel smote him with the edge of the sword and possessed his land from Arnon to Jabbok, even unto the children of Ammon. For the border of the children of Ammon was strong. And Israel took all the cities. And Israel dwelt in all of the cities of the Amorites, in Heshbon, and in all the villages thereof. So they were, this is why you can't judge a book by its cover, people. We're gonna read how big these Amorites were. And they figured they could just go in on these cats and just kill them all off. Nah, y'all ain't coming through here. We're gonna make sure we get rid of y'all. And they got taken out. Because they had the Lord on their side. The Lord said you're going to take them out. Let's go to verse 31. Thus Israel dwelt in the land of the Amorites, and Moses sent out the spy unto Jahazer, and they took the villages thereof and drove out the Amorites that were there. And they turned and went up by the way of Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, went out against them. So now another Canaanite is coming against them, and he and all his people to battle at Edrei. And the Lord said unto Moses, fear him not, for I have delivered him unto thy hand, for all his people and his land. And thou shalt do him as thou didst unto Sihon, king of the Amorites, which dwelt in Heshbon. So they already killed off the Amorites, but here comes some more Canaanites, and they about to deal with them too. Verse 35. So they smote and his sons, they smote him and his sons and all his people until there was not one left him alive, and they possessed his land. The Lord was fed up with the Canaanites, and he saw all their sins, and he was like, go and kill them all. So there's no more Amorites. When we went into that land, we were supposed to kill off all the Canaanites, period. But the Amorites come from the Canaanites. So here the Lord is telling us all the Amorites were killed. So the question that I've always left in people's chats is, where are the Amorites today, if you still believe that the 400 years is today? Because the 400 years, if you apply it today, one, we should have been gone in two. Let's do with 1979. First, we should have been gone in 1979. And I was what, 11 years old at that time? So we should have been gone in 1979. That didn't happen. So now it's 2019. That didn't happen. All right. Now, if you're saying that we got to wait for the judgments and all of that stuff, okay, I'm going to still roll with you, even though that's not the case. But where are the Amorites? Because the promise says 4 generations after he takes us out, we're going back to kill the Amorites off. But the evidence is here in the law showing that that has already happened. So if you still believe the 400 years is now, show me where the Amorites are, and I may change my position on this whole thing. Let's confirm that the Amorites are gone. Let's go to Amos 2. Let's hear the words come out of the Lord's mouth himself. People, we got to start reading what the Lord says and stop believing people that done made up a doctrine based off of one verse or 2 verses. Let's read what the Lord said about the Amorites. Amos 2, verse 9. Yet I destroyed the Amorite before them. Now, this is the Lord talking. This ain't Amos. This is the Lord talking through the mouth of Amos. Yet because Amos wasn't living back then, right? He didn't destroy the Amorite. So this is the Lord speaking. Yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was as the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above, and his roots from beneath. Also, I brought you up out of the land of Egypt and led you 40 years in the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. Now, if you're, I ain't trying to sound too harsh on Israel, y'all, but if you're saying that the 400 years is now, you're lying on the Lord. The Lord is the one that said 4 generations, they're coming back here because the iniquity isn't full. Then here in Numbers, he showed us when that happened. Then here in Amos, he's saying himself I did this. He didn't say I'm going to do this in the future. He said, I did this. Let's go to Matthew 1. Let's go to Matthew 1, because what's going to happen is I'm the type of person, man, when I do something, I got to make it solid. And I thank the Lord for that. All right. I try not to leave anything wide open, because what's going to happen is people going to say 4 generations. Well, let's see how long a generation is. Because what you see in front of you, let me move this back so you can see the bottom. All right. Y'all got to excuse me. You know, I know some of y'all probably thought, oh, he got the program thing. No, I don't. I got 2 computers sitting right here. All right. So he said in the 4th generation is after he brought them out, in the 4th generation is when they're going to come back, right? Let's see how many generations it's been. All right. Let's just start reading. Verse 1. Matthew 1:1. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, Jacob begot Judas and his brethren. Let's skip down to verse 17. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. I don't know what it is. Every time I get ready to do these lessons, boy, that phlegm want to mess with me. So let's read it again. So all the generations of Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David until the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations. And from I said 4 generations on the first one. Okay, let's start from the top. Maybe I said it wrong. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David until the carrying away of the Babylon are 14 generations. And from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. So what you see in front of you are 42 generations from Abraham all the way to Jesus. But the Lord said in 4 generations, he was going to come, that the children of Israel were going to come back. Now let's skip down here to number 10. When you look at number 10, you see Solomon and Rahab. All right. Now we already got a witness in Joseph. I mean, not Joseph. Boy, I get everything confused when it comes to these names in J's. Joshua. We read in Joshua before, you could read it yourself, that Rahab testified and said, we heard of what your God did for you in Egypt. And we heard about everything you've been doing in the land of Canaan. And the men in Jericho was so terrified and scared, they didn't even want to fight. This is while the Lord had us going through the land, killing off everybody, including the Amorites. So, in my opinion, I need to research and find out where, but somewhere between here, I don't even want to say here, because let's see, I can't say here because I know Moses was dead when they went into Rahab. So I would say somewhere between number 6, 7, maybe 8 is when they went back and killed off the Amorites. 4 generations. But what you see here is 42 generations. So I'm just trying to show people that if anyone tries to disprove 4 generations, you run right here and you can see from the time he spoke to Abraham to the time they went into captivity and came out, somewhere around here is when the 4th generation went back and killed off the Amorites. And that's it. That's when it comes down to the 400 years. Then, but people still want to say that it's now. And it ain't now. We're going to go over some. I already see that. Let's go to Hosea 3. I'm sorry, 13. Let's go to 13. Now, there are some videos. I'm going to play one video. I'm not going to play the other two because I don't know which one got me flagged. But if you are a subscriber on my Facebook channel, which is Azakay Fingers, it didn't get flagged there. So you can go there and see two videos that I'm not going to show of Israel being spread. All right. So let's go to Hosea 13. All right. And what you're looking at in front of you is the Gentile dynasty. Now, this is what Daniel said that these animals represented. But we're not going to read Daniel. You can read that on your own. Daniel 7, verse 4 through 7. But we're going to read Hosea 13 and start at verse 4. Yet I am the Lord thy God from the land of Egypt, and thou shalt know no God but me. For there is no Savior besides me. This is how we also know there's only one Savior, and that's Christ. So for those that want to say, nah, there's only one God, listen, there's one God family. But when it comes to man, there's only one God in that family we have dealt with personally, and that's Christ. And that's why he says there is no Savior beside me. The Father ain't coming to save you. The Son is. That's why he sent the Son, remember? God so loved the world, he sent his only begotten Son. Whoever believe on him or in him shall have everlasting life. And what did the Son say? Keep the commandments. But that's another lesson. Let's keep going. And I did know thee in the wilderness and in the land of great drought. The land of great drought is Egypt. That whole place. Remember, everybody was going through that. I knew thee in the wilderness. Isn't that what Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 10? And that rock was Christ. Verse 6. According to their pasture, so were they filled. They were filled, their heart waxed exalted. Therefore, they have forgotten me. So we got so pumped up on ourselves, we forgot the Lord was doing all this for us and started not keeping his commandments. So what did he do to his beloved people? Therefore, I will be unto them as a lion, as the leopard. By the way, I will observe them. I will meet them as a bear that is bereaved of her whelps, and I will rend the call of their heart. And there will I devour them like a lion. The wild beast shall tear them. Some people may look at this and be like, oh, well, no. The Lord is saying he's coming. And what is he coming as? He's coming as a lion. Well, who was the lion? The Babylonian Empire. That's all what you see right here is the empire of the Gentiles, the dynasty of the Gentiles, white folks and Asians, but mainly the white folks. The Babylonian, he came as a lion. He came as a leopard. There's the Greek Empire. He came as a bear. That's the Medo-Persian Empire. And then in Daniel, the fourth beast was so fierce, the Lord himself couldn't even come up with an animal that bad. So in here he says, and there will I devour them like a lion. But in Daniel, it says that the beast devoured and trampled and stamped. I'm paraphrasing, but those that understand know what I'm saying. The wild beast shall tear them. These are the beasts that's tearing us apart. And we're in the last one right now, which is the Roman Empire still. But what did the Lord say to Israel? Verse 9. O Israel, thou hast destroyed thyself, but in me is thine help. We brought what we're about to deal with now and in part 2 is what we brought upon ourselves. Let's understand. In the 400-year prophecy, the Lord was telling Abraham what he was going to do. And those people did nothing wrong. He had to do something to prove to his people he exists, because everybody was being raised on other gods. But here, what we're going to deal with is what we did ourselves. We turned against God, and he said, Israel, thou hast destroyed thyself, but in me is thine help. Let's go to Luke 19. He said, in me is the help. You destroyed yourself. I ain't had nothing to do with this. I gave you all the commandments. I showed you how to love, period. Me and yourself. But y'all don't want to keep the commandments. So I'm going to step back, and all these curses going to come upon you. You can read them in Deuteronomy 28, which we will do. But let's go to Luke 19. And we're going to start reading. I forgot what's next. What's next? Yeah. Luke 19. And we're going to start reading at verse 41. And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it. This is Christ. Christ is beholding this city, and he's weeping. He's crying over it. Why is he crying over it? Because Christ, the husband, has been trying to tell his wife for years, obey me, submit unto me. Everything I'm giving you is out of love. I love you. I just want you to love me back. But did we do that? No. We kept rebelling as a wicked wife. So now more judgments are coming down on the wife. Verse 41 again. And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, if thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace. But now they are hid from thine eyes. If you only knew the things that I had prepared for you, if you would have just obeyed me. But now you're not going to get them. You're not getting them at all. You're going to get destruction. Verse 43. For the day shall come upon thee that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee and compass thee round and keep thee on every side. And shall they lay even with the ground and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. So he's telling them the destruction of Jerusalem that's going to come. But he's crying over it because he could see it. And let's also remember, Jerusalem is the beloved city where he and the Father are going to dwell. But the wife ain't taking care of the house. So he's weeping over this. Why is he weeping? Because he warned us. Let's go back in Deuteronomy 28. He warned us back in the curses. Deuteronomy 28. We're not gonna read the whole chapter. For those is like, oh, you better read it 28 again. We're about to read the DNA identity marker of who Israel is. I don't need a DNA test, even though I would probably like to take one just to see. But from what I've heard, what I've been hearing other brothers and sisters say, is what they took their DNA test and it straight linked them to the Limba and linked them to the Asante and the Ibu and everybody else. And we know that those tribes are Israelite tribes, but now that everyone else is starting to figure that out, they said they've gone on their sites and they've watched the percentage go down. Like it could have been, let's just say it could have been 98% Ibu or Yoruba or something like that. And then all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later or a couple of months later, it ain't 98% no more. It's like 50. And then later on, it didn't jump down to 14. I done heard people say that. I'm like, see, they're catching on to what is going on. They have thrown us off to believe we are just African. But now that we're looking at the bloodline and looking at the book and their history books, we're understanding who Hebrews are in Africa. And we were brought here from there. So now they got to turn the percentage down. That's why I don't trust DNA. I just don't. Because for one thing, Hebrews don't run it. My DNA identity marker is right here in Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26 and the whole book. But what did the Lord say was going to happen? He said Jerusalem was going to get destroyed. Let's read it in Deuteronomy 28 when he told us ahead of time. So he told our forefathers ahead of time. Deuteronomy 28 verse 15. But if it shall come to pass that if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God to observe and to do his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Now you could read 15 to the end of the chapter on your own, but I would also say read the blessings. Read this whole entire chapter. Why? Because you will see the blessings that can come upon you as an individual, but you will also see the blessings as a nation we could have had. We could have had these as a blessing, and we did at one time till we turned to another God. But here he says, if you will not keep my commandments, these are the things that's going to happen to you. Let's go down to verse 52. Verse 52. And he shall besiege thee at all thy gates until thy high and fenced walls come down. Isn't this what Jesus was talking about? When we were reading Luke 19, this is what Jesus was telling them. Wherein thou trustest throughout all the land, and he shall siege thee in all thy gates throughout all thy land, which the Lord God hath given thee. And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and the flesh of thy daughters, which the Lord God hath given thee in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee. So he's telling us, everything I've given you, if you don't obey me, I'm taking it away. You're going to have a great city. And y'all going to hide in the city. You're going to hide in that city and being sieged up. And the thing is, you're going to eat your own children, literally. Because in history books, it shows that happened. They were starved so much that when children died, they ate their children. That's what our ancestors had to do. Let's skip down. Let's go back to verse 32 now. Let's go back to verse 32. Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long. And there shall be no might in thy hand. Your sons and your daughters. Let's go skip down to verse 41. And thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. And that's what happened. Thy sons and thy daughters. Again, thy sons and thy daughters shall go into captivity. But this ain't stopped just because we're in captivity now. We got more children in DCFS than anybody. Somebody could call on you in a minute and say, yeah, I heard such and such, he was whooping his child. And then the police come by, ask questions. Next thing you know, your child is gone into the DCF system. And you will not enjoy your child no more. All because you were disciplining your child to correct them in love like God said to do. Skip down to verse 64. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, not just in America, because that's the problem our forefathers had here in America when they started reading this book again. They thought the 400 years was just about America because they didn't know the rest of the world. They probably knew and heard of Africa, And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth even to the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. So we've learned to serve other gods because God was like, you already serving other gods. So in the future, if you don't change in the future, your children gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna make you serve other gods. And that's the problem that we have when it comes to Roman Catholicism, Christianity. That's serving other gods. We didn't know the God of Christmas. The whole world knew the God of Christmas, the unconquering God, the rebirth of the unconquering God, sun God. But we didn't know. Then we started finding out, and then the Lord turned around and made us serve him. We didn't know about Easter. We didn't know about Sunday worship service only. And that's why we're in the situation we are in now. But he said he was going to scatter us, right? Skip down to verse 68. And the Lord shall bring thee again into Egypt with ships. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. By the way thereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. So he's telling us, I'm going to bring you back into Egypt. But when he was talking to them, the only thing that they knew was the bondage they had in Egypt. That's why in Exodus 19, he said, I'm the Lord thy God that brought you up out of Egypt, the house of bondage. I'm paraphrasing, but he compared Egypt to the place of bondage. And that's why, my beloved urban and Christian apologists, we say Egypt represents bondage. And my beloved Hebrew brothers, Babylon represents the entire world, not just America. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen. You will be sold to your enemies for slaves, not servants, for slaves. You will be sold. You will not, what the other translation says, you will offer yourselves. Oh, I was about to cuss. Who in the world would offer? Let's imagine I'm in Africa. Okay. I'm in Africa and I see these Gentiles coming and I say, hey, I want to be your slave. I'm offering myself to be your slave. No, that's not what it is. That's another translation Bible that says that a lot of urban and Christian apologetics like to use. Ain't nobody offering themselves to be a slave. People are going to offer themselves to work and get paid for it. And there shall you be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. No one's buying you out of the situation. First of all, he said you will be sold. So if the Lord says you'll be sold, that means somebody's buying you. So the end part here is no man shall buy you. No one's going to buy you out of this situation I'm going to put you in. And nobody has been able to bring all of Israel out of Egypt, the house of bondage, out of the four corners of the earth that we were sold to and shipped to in cargo ships. Nobody's been able to do that. Let's go to Deuteronomy 4. Let's go to Deuteronomy 4 and see what he said here. Deuteronomy 4, verse 26. He said it again here. Deuteronomy 4. Ooh, that's 5. Deuteronomy 4, verse 26. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that ye shall soon, that ye shall soon utterly perish from off the land whereunto ye go over Jordan to possess it. Ye shall not prolong your days upon it, but shall utterly be destroyed. And the Lord shall scatter you among the nations. Now, this is what the Lord said. He said, I'm going to scatter you among the nations. He didn't say, I'm going to take this tribe and put them on this island. I'm going to take this tribe, put them on this land. He didn't say, I'm going to organize you guys here and there. So for that whole 12 tribes chart, this verse and the one we read in Deuteronomy 28 kills the whole 12 tribes chart that people are trying to revamp now. Now that they done, now that some of these cats have discovered that, yeah, those are Israelites in Africa, they're revamping the 12 tribes chart. I'm not going to say what camp I saw it, but yeah, now they're adding, you just let it go. Let it go, brothers. A false prophet made that false chart, and another one that was with him admitted and said, this ain't right. You know this ain't right. Yeah, but it's the hook to come get them in. Can't start things off with a lie when it comes to the Lord. But let's keep reading. He said, and the Lord shall scatter you among the nations, and ye shall be left few in number, and the heathen, whether the Lord shall lead you. And there ye shall serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. Sounds like idols to me, right? And if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, that thou shalt find him, if thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul. And when thou art in tribulation, and all these things come upon thee, even in the latter days. So we're definitely talking about being scattered and things that's going to happen to us in the latter days because of our own fault. If thou turn unto the Lord thy God and be obedient unto his voice. How do you be obedient unto the Lord's voice? You keep the commandments like he told you. Christ came back and told the nation of Israel the same thing, right? He told them, keep the commandments. The end of the book we read, keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus in order to become a saint. This is the simplicity in Christ. Let's keep reading. For the Lord thy God is a merciful God. Yes, he is. He will not forsake thee, neither destroy thee, nor forget the covenant of thy fathers, which he sware unto them. He's still dealing with the same promises he dealt with Abraham and our fathers in the wilderness. It's just that Christ came to open up the access to the Father because he died for all of our sins. But we still have to keep the commandments to our best ability. Because we're not in the land in our own government, we can't keep all the commandments of God. But there's some that we can keep. And if you ain't even trying to keep them, that's on you. That's just a warning. But that's what the Lord said. He said, I will scatter you. So when 70 AD came, we can read. Now, what you're looking at is a map of us migrating. Because when he came, when the Lord allowed, what was it, Titus? I forgot the general's name, to come and destroy Jerusalem, some of us escaped. Even in the Assyrian Empire, when the Babylonians came to destroy the Assyrians, some of us escaped. And both times, everybody knew, run south. Ain't no use of running north. So they ran south. And they went from here, you got Assyria here, and you got Israel here. And everybody knew to run into Egypt. The Lord even told Joseph, flee into Egypt with Jesus. There's no use of running north. Why? Because if the Egyptians are black, that come on, Jesus had to be black too with the rest of Israel. So still, they fled, went past the Sahara Desert, came down the Nile River, went to this is all West Africa. Why did they go past? Because the Hamites, I call the original the original Africans, the Hamites. Remember we read the 4 sons that Ham had? You had the Cush, you had Mizraim, who was Egypt, you had Put, it should be an H there, but it should be called Foot. I'm sorry. Those are the Libyans, and then the Canaanites that were up here. Now remember, when we were here, this is where Abram had the dream. Then everybody went into Egypt as slaves. Then they stayed there, I believe, 430 years. Came out on the 430-year marker or 400-year marker. Came back and killed off all the Amorites right here. But in 70 AD, when it was the nation of Israel, and the Romans came, they occupied this. They occupied the whole Mediterranean. So we knew to flee south, because if we go north, those white folks. So we fled south, but we also, like I said, they also occupied Egypt. So we kept going. And that's when we ended up here. A land, a land that was not occupied for my Apocrypha brothers and sisters. So this is the land that the Hamites had. And this is when we fled past them into, you can see here it says Yoruba. But while we were still there, we didn't stop running. All right. This is Bantu homeland. And this is for my brothers and sisters in Africa. We kept fleeing or just migrating because we were really running from the Romans. Went far south as we could go down here to South Africa. I got another lesson where I show way more maps of the Assyrian Hebrews, the Hebrews that were in Assyria, how they fled and came down the east coast of Africa to South Africa now. That's why most of the Limba are really Levites. So all this land right here was unoccupied. Again, for my Apocrypha brothers and sisters. And that's why this whole place was called Negro land at one time. This whole place was called Negro land. What is Negro in Spanish? Black. So they called it Black land. And this is why we still call Negroes today. And of course, it changed into the word nigger. But this is what we've dealt with today. Now, what we have here, because what I'm dealing with now, we've already shown that the 400 years was in either the land of Egypt and Canaan, but it was at that time. It was not now. How do we know this? Let's read this. Slavery timeline, 1400 to 1500. The chronology of slavery, abolition, and emancipation in the 15th century. This page contains detailed timeline of the main historical, literally, and cultural events connected with British slavery, abolition, and emancipation between 1400 and 1500. It also includes references to the most significant events taking place outside of the British zone of influence in the 15th century that was most of the world, as well as some key events in the history of European exploration and colonization. So you can see the site. Here's the site right here. You could go look yourself. All right. We're going to deal with most of this stuff in part 2 next week. Now, this is before 1400. Let's read this. Before 1400. Now, this is way before 1619. Slavery had existed in Europe from classical times and did not appear with the collapse of the Roman Empire Slaves remained common in Europe throughout the early medieval period. However, slavery of the classical type became increasingly uncommon in the Northern Europe, and by the 11th and 12th centuries had been effectively abolished in the North. Nevertheless, forms of unfree labor such as villeinage and serfdom persisted in the North well into the early modern period. In the Southern and Eastern Europe, classical style slavery remained a normal part of the society and economic excuse me, an economy and trade across the Mediterranean and the Atlantic seaboard meant that African slaves began to appear in Italy, Spain, southern France, and Portugal well before the discovery of the New World in 1492. So from 70 AD, we were taken out as slaves on ships to Europe too, or marched around towards Europe. Remember, Paul took ships when he was going to Greece and Rome and all these places. So when they got us, they took us to Europe too. That was way before 1492. But right here, what we're reading is that this continued to go on from about the 8th century onwards. An Arab-run slave trade also flourished. Oh, wait a minute. I thought the white man came up with this. From the 8th century onwards, an Arab-run slave trade also flourished, with much of this activity taking place in East Africa, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean. So there was slavery going on before 1619. The 400 years that you think is not about America. It's about all of Israel. I've already shown that Israel fled where? Israel fled and went into Africa. Now, hold on a second, people. Israel fled and went into Africa. But the Europeans and the Ishmaelites, or the Arabs, came in there and took us back. The Arab slave trade and the role of Islam in African slavery. This hardly ever gets talked about. And this was way before 1619. Slavery in Africa before European arrival. As you can see, when I showed you, we ran from here, past the Hamites, came into West Africa. Other tribes kept running and went down south, mainly the Bantu. But as you can see here from this map, when Ishmael came and got us out, took us right back and took us to India. And further than that, when the Europeans discovered how to get around Africa. The Lord wasn't playing with us, man. He said, I'm going to scatter you through the four corners. Again, to my Christian and urban apologist brothers and sisters, What other people got scattered around the world as slaves in cargo ships? You can't find that. And again, I put out that challenge that none of you guys have taken. What people did all the curses happen to? I mean, not that one. If it's not us, then prove who it is. That was my challenge I put out years ago, and none of these guys did anything. If you're saying that we are not the children of Israel, and you're saying, well, you know, other curses happen to other people and all this stuff, every single one of the curses in Deuteronomy 28 has happened only to Israel. And if you read Deuteronomy 32, it says that this was a sign and a wonder upon Israel. So if you're saying it's not us, you have to prove who it is. And I'm telling you now, you're not going to be able to prove it's the people that's in the land right now. You cannot stop this awakening that's going on. So let me stop ranting. But the Arabs took us out and brought us to India and other places. Now, I can't play this video. All right. But again, if you go on my Facebook page, you can see a video of a people called the Cities. All right. These are people who were taken from the east coast of Africa and brought to be slaves. The video is going to say, well, they were brought here because they were hard workers. No. Anybody's going to be a hard worker if you got a gun and a whip to their back. You threatening to kill them. Yeah, I'm going to work hard too because I don't want to die. But they were brought there. And in the video, the guy says they were brought by the African princes and the Muslim princes. So who was that? That had to be the Hamites helping the Arabs bring us east. So I can't play the video because I'm afraid I'll get blocked for this one and I won't be able to get this message across. So we did that one. So in the system, we go back. So when we look at the face of India, we always see this face. Same thing when it comes to Brazil and the Philippines. But we never see these faces. This is what's also called God's hidden ones. And all this started in 70 AD, getting scattered. That really kind of started with the Assyrian Empire, because after that, after the Babylons took over the Syrian Empire, Israel fled in a lot of directions. But the scattered part was when we were all taken out of Africa, not just West Africa, out of East Africa too, and Southern Africa. And these are the faces you do not see in those countries. That's why we're called the hidden ones. God made sure that there was a system that was going to be oppressing us, like we read in Deuteronomy 28. And in here, what you see is called the caste system. These are different classes right here, 5 different classes. All right. In this caste system, which is now modern day, it's very rich, rich, middle, poor, and very poor. Now, here's the thing about this. Let me read this part right here. The modern day system is very different from India's caste system. In the modern day system, there are 5 different levels, which are very rich, rich, middle, poor, and very poor. Now, when it comes to this caste system, nobody can marry outside of their class. So you can marry, if you're here, you have to get permission to marry here. And so forth. All 4 of these classes have to get permission to marry either up or down, but they must stay in their class. Even the very, very rich. But nobody is supposed to mess with what here is called the untouchables. And that's Israel. They can't marry up, and nobody here can marry them. Now, there's cases I've heard that it has happened, but most of the time, whoever's married to them, now that wife or husband or whatever becomes them. They're not here anymore. And hopefully, I'm gonna give you guys a treat. I actually ran into an elderly cat that lives right in the next city from me, and I already asked him, can I interview him? When that happens, I will let you guys know, so we can get more details about our Hebrew brothers and sisters over in India. God put this dude right in my lap. I ain't gonna lie, but this is the caste system. So this is what is going on with our Hebrew brothers over there. Now in the video, okay, this is the Philippines. I'm gonna let y'all look at that closely while I talk about what the brother told us in the video. In the video, he said that the city people were brought there in 1411. Man, if somebody think I'm lying, like I said, go on my Facebook page, go watch the whole lesson. The video is in there. But he said the city people were brought there in 1411. That's over 600 years. So how is the 400-year prophecy applying to them? It's not. Again, my purpose is to show people that the 400-year prophecy was back in the days of Egypt and Canaan, in the early days of Israel, the baby days when we were born. It's not now. A lot of the stuff I'm showing you, some people have no idea about because they've been stuck on what somebody said here. So 1411, that's way before 1619. Again, the whole prophecy is about all of Israel, not 13% of the population in America. But right here, you see Hebrews in the Philippines. Usually when you look at someone that's from the Philippines, you don't see no dark skin colors like that. Hidden ones. There was another video I had that I can't show either, was about the Ottoman Turks. There's a brother, you see that on the Facebook version too. There was a brother who said the Ottoman Turks brought them to Turkey as slaves. This is Israel still. But this is way before the Europeans started bringing us to America. Now I am going to show this video. I am going to show this one. Oh, that thing was probably buzzing the whole time. I'm sorry if there was a buzz. But I am going to show this video. I'm going to show this one because I don't believe this is what got me in trouble. We're going to watch. Let me start it up real quick. Now, we're going to watch right here. This is, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but Papua, I think it's Papua New Guinea. If you don't know where New Guinea is, Papua New Guinea, if you look at the continent of Australia and you look north to another big island that's not as big as Australia and see that island look like it could fit in Australia, that's Papua New Guinea. And that's where these people are from. And these are Hebrews. And these guys know they're Hebrews. So to my Christian and urban apologists, you cannot stop Ezekiel 33, the awakening of God's children, because none of us have went to Papua New Guinea and told these people that they're Israel, but they know they're Israel. Let's look at this video. Hold on. Now, in the other video, I misquoted what they said. They said, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. We are Israel. That's what these cats said. You cannot stop what comes out of the mouth of the Lord. And my fellow brother Christian and urban apologists, you guys read that book and you should know what the Lord comes out of his mouth shall not come back to him void. That video right there, nobody from America has gone over there and taught them anything. And now all of a sudden, oh, see, they didn't got over there to Papua New Guinea. No, these people know who they are. And they're way on the other side of the earth. For those that like to say, and I hear this from some Hebrews too, Christ never taught about identity. And you're right. Why? Because all the people in Israel knew who they were. They knew that. So trying to use that to get people to stop trying to figure out who they are, it's not going to work. You're fighting against the Lord. Those people knew who they were. Here in America, we've been stripped with so much stuff. That's why the Lord said the dry bones. And not just here, but in other places. But now he's waking everybody up on who they are. And so now everybody's waking up. Some people they knew who they were all their lives and they know why they were there. But to my Hebrew brothers that do know who they are, what you're looking at right here is past. And why? Because time's been up. Time was up way back in in Moses' day. That's when the time was up. The 400 years and the 430 years was up back then. This is not the time. And I'm going to show you guys this in part 2. Because the English, I'm going to tell you why you believe this, and then I'm going to get off. The reason why you believe 1619 to 2019 is one, because of the school system that was planted here in America. The English were the ones who established all the schools. The English never told about the failed settlements they had before 1619. They're not even telling you about the Spanish who had settlements here 100 years way before 1619. So because in school we believed that we were brought here in 1619, once we got to the book, we started reading 400 years and people started predicting and false prophesying. I don't care what signs you see that's going on now. You better look at what the book says. Don't think that the nations that's suppressing you don't see and hear what we're talking about and ain't trying to put their little twist on it. And that's what we're going to be dealing with in the next lesson. Make sure you guys come back. I'm going to try not to play no videos because that's what got me in trouble. Ooh. Sorry about that. Please like, share the video. Come back this Sabbath coming up. I'm going to finish this lesson, 400 years. Time's been up, part 2. And like I said, this is all to not let people fall away from the truth that the Lord has put in front of us. Because Satan's helpers is out here, not just with the Christian and urban apologists, but also within Israel. Remember, he said that the wheat and the tare grow together. You got to decipher who's the wheat and who's the tare. All glory to the Father in the name of Jesus. Thank you for watching. Come back next week for part 2. Peace.
Time to wake up.
Wake up. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Up you wake, up you wake, up you wake, up you wake.
Time to wake up.